Hey Scrappy Peeps, Suzanna here today for Whimsy Stamps and ThermoWeb, and I'm sharing this layout with you that I created using product from both companies. I've pre-warmed up my hot laminator there, and what I'm doing is I'm going to use the DecoFoil adhesive pen to overwrite some of the cursive words that are on this pattern paper from Pink Paislee. This is the Confetti Wishes collection. So I've just chosen 3 clusters of words, and the reason that I've chosen that 3 is for that visual triangle effect on a page to take your eye around the page there. You do not need to let this dry for a super long time like you do with the paste, and so literally you just need to let it dry 30 to 60 seconds. So by the time you've cut your foil that you're going to overlay on there, it's pretty dry and you are good to go. So this is the Jade DecoFoil. I'm just cutting pieces that are long enough to cover those words or phrases, and then I'm going to put the 12 by 12 piece of pattern paper through the hot laminator in some parchment. Now, there are 2 ways that you can add foil once you've used those pens. You can either put it through the laminator, as I'm doing here, either that or you can run it through a die cutting machine. I don't have a 12 by 12 die cutting machine, which is why I opted for the laminator. But if you're working on smaller pieces, you can absolutely run that through a die cutting machine, and you can see there how impatient I am and I want to see how it turns out. So it's a little bit, because the pen is a slightly fatter pen, the nib, the point is thicker than the writing. It is a little bit bolder, but that's okay because it's kind of like you've got a bolded word. So the next thing I'm doing here is I have this stencil from Whimsy Stamps. It's called Beaded Curtain, and I am just using that same adhesive pen to go through the stencil and tracing over the dots and the dashes. And with this, I am actually going to use some gold foil to add some sparkle and some birthday confetti to my birthday layout here. So again, just like I did when I was just free-forming the writing, this only takes 30 to 60 seconds to dry. I will tell you a word of advice. I would quickly make sure that you get that glue off of the stencil, because it does dry very quickly, just as it dries on paper, and it can get glue through your stencil, which is fine. It's not a big deal. It does come out, but you do have to scrub just that little bit harder. So just as I did previously, you're going to cut the gold foil or whatever color foil it is that you want to use, and again run that through your preheated hot stencil. So previously I had used, actually what I used previously was wax paper. I definitely recommend that you use parchment paper, not wax paper. It leaves a sort of a residue on the foil, which isn't a big deal, but it definitely works better if you use parchment. Either that or just like I did just now, I didn't use any parchment. I literally just ran it through and it works just fine. So I have a collage of pictures here that I created in Photoshop, and those are going to be the central pictures of the layout there. So that is actually ending up to be a 4 by 6 photo. It's just collaged. And I'm going to use this darker pattern paper with these candles that runs on the same incline as the words. I like the way that the weight of that pattern paper sits above the photo there and adds some balance. The shirt that I'm wearing in that photo is fairly dark, and if you don't add that balance, it stands out like a sore thumb. So one of the design principles that you want to consider is the balance of color, so light to dark in your page. I now have these pattern paper strips that are part of the collection, and they look a lot like the angled inclines in the Quick Strips die set. So some of the strips are banners, some of the strips are ovals, some of the strips are kind of rounded strips, and then you've got these incline things that mimic that pattern paper that I had there, and that's what I am going with. Originally, I was going to put 2 lines of those with the inclines going in the opposite directions. However, I didn't like the way that it added a funky line of color to the up and down movement of those candles. So I'm actually going to change my mind, and I'm just going to put that strip that creates the delineation between the top header and then the rest of the page there. So I'm going to get out my Big Kick and find some pattern papers to cut those different strips from the Whimsy Stamp Quick Strips die set. That is a mouthful. So these particular, those inclined ones that I'm using there, one of them is straight edge, and then the other has sort of a embossed stitched look to it, which adds this kind of fun little dimension with a little bit more visual interest to those strips. It works very well for your tone-on-tone papers and for your cardstocks, but it's harder to see those little stitches, especially if you have a very fine detail in your pattern paper there. So you must remember that if you want to use both sides of the paper, you're going to have to run it on the side that you want to see, because otherwise the incline goes the opposite direction. Found that out the hard way. And then I also have cut out 2 of the banners. The banners come in different sizes, and again, one of those banners, the shorter banner, also has the sort of embossed stitch in it, and I'm going to use those on the page just to add a little bit more of that diagonal motion throughout the page there. So now that I've die cut these bits and pieces, this is where I'm going to start putting the page together. There are a couple of things that I am actually going to end up doing off camera. I am going to what am I going to do? I'm going to add some Spiegelmom Scraps sequence that coordinates with the collection. And the name of the mix that I end up using is called Jaded Heart, if you're interested. I am also going to use some gold foam letters that also add some dimension that will go with the rest of the dimension that you'll see me putting into the page here. So I have a couple of these. I was going to use some phrases from the actual pattern paper up top in that border there when I was going to do the 2 lines, but I end up taking those out, and there's only one word that I end up using, and that's hooray, which is in the top right hand corner. So I do use the other words. I just trim off the ends in those banners that I used from the Whimsy Stamp Quick Strip die cut. So I am now going to start putting all of those pieces down and adhere that. I end up putting the picture up a little bit higher than I was going to originally. I was going to center it between that top happy birthday and that bottom say cheese, but I really wanted you to be able to see the gold stripe and circles that I had used in the stencil. So I actually used that as a bit of a shelf to nestle the picture on top of. Those are the strips from the die cut, and then some of the letters. And now I'm going to pull out all of my embellishments from the Pink Paislee Confetti Wishes collection. What I have here is I have some chipboard pieces, I have a sticker book, and then I also have some chipboard pieces that actually come from a card collection that go with this. I'm not much of a card maker, but I like the chipboard for my layouts, and so that's what I'm going to use here. So I'm using a Gina K dot roller to put all of my stuff down. When it comes to the heavier pieces or things that need a little bit more of a fine tip and fine application, I am going to use the Ultra Bond adhesive from ThermoWeb. I love using that Ultra Bond for chipboard, like these pieces that I have here. They stick super well. These chipboard pieces are actually self-adhesive. You just pull a backing off. But I find that the weight of the chipboard against the pattern paper never really holds. So if you are picking up the page and the page kind of bends a little bit, that they never really stick. So when you use a liquid adhesive like the Ultra Bond, it really does a great job at making sure that things don't go anywhere. So I love this yay and that tropical leaf there. And then there's going to be a hot pink flower that I pull out there. I like the way that that just adds a little bit more down the page, and that weight of that cluster there sort of offsets the weight of all of the stuff up top. Another thing that I am going to do off camera is that when you cut that candle paper up the top there, it actually looks like a stripe. So I'm going to use an inclined stripe just down at the very bottom, just a thin strip of that to kind of ground the page. So what I did here there there's a kind of a journal looking tag. That is a print and cut file from Cocoa Daisy, and I am actually going to journal in that. And what I end up journaling about is the sparklers. So these are actual sparklers. They're like birthday candle sparklers that the kids put on my cake. And it was kind of a scary experience, actually, because literally there were sparkles flying everywhere. And it's a good thing we didn't have a tablecloth on the table, or I think the tablecloth might have caught on fire. So that is what the picture is all about, or the photos are all about, me on my birthday. And I won't give away, but the layout, there are 2 numbers on there that they do tell you how old I just turned. So now what I'm doing here is I am using, there's a new die set, and it's a more recent die set from Whimsy Stamps, and it's called Thanks Word with Shadow. And so I'm using the word, and then there's 2 different shadow options. There's just the plain shadow, and then there is a stitch embossed shadow. So I'm going to use the plain shadow, and I want to gold foil that. So I'm going to use that black there that then picks up the gold foil if you run it through a laminator for the shadow. And then for the word, I'm going to use that hot pink stripe. It's not a stripe, it's some pattern, animal print pattern from my stash. So you see how you can't see that pink just by itself, but when you put it on the gold, it picks it up nicely. So I'm going to overlay that gold, put that in a parchment packet, and run that through the hot laminator. And it's going to give me this really cool gold effect that's going to be the shadow for the Whimsy Stamp thank you or thanks word. Now, I know it kind of doesn't make any sense, but the reason I'm putting thanks on the layout is because I am trying to be a little bit more grateful about things. I am not one for birthdays, and I am trying to express some gratitude for my family remembering to celebrate my birthday and making me feel important on my birthday. So that's what sort of the symbolism of that is. So what I have here are some 3D foam squares. I am going to pop the word thanks off that strip up the top there. I love the way that the dimension works really well with the chipboard dimension, as well as the dimension that are going to go in the gold letters there. So that is going to wrap up the layout, my friends. There are some close-ups to follow. Enjoy the close-ups. Thanks for stopping in today. I hope you're doing well. Take care.